Hey there, welcome back. Tonight we're dimming the lights, slowing everything way down, and wandering through a few corners of history that don't get nearly enough attention. We'll start with a plant that humanity has been arguing about for roughly 7,000 years. Then we'll drift over to ancient Rome, where grown adults once rioted because of horse racing. And if you're still awake after that, we'll spend a few quiet moments with a Renaissance woman who survived everything the 15th century could throw at her, and looked elegant doing it. Before we begin, go ahead and close your eyes if you'd like, or stare gently at the ceiling. The goal here is rest. History is just a very long bedtime story, and tonight it's yours. No pressure, no quiz at the end. Let's begin. Part 1, the plant that outlasted every empire. We're going back now, way back. About 5,000 years, give or take. The world is very quiet. There are no cities, not really. There are fire pits and animal hides and the kind of darkness that people today almost never experience. Stars are just everywhere, somewhere on the Central Asian steppe. Imagine rolling grasslands, cold wind, a sky so wide it feels like a ceiling. Someone tossed a bundle of dried plants onto a fire, maybe for warmth, maybe out of curiosity, maybe out of boredom, which has always been one of humanity's most powerful motivators. The smoke drifted up. A few people leaned in closer, and somewhere in that moment, a relationship began between people and cannabis. A relationship so long and complicated that it would survive the fall of Egypt, the rise of Rome, the invention of gunpowder, and the creation of bureaucracy, which might honestly be the most impressive part. At first, nobody was getting high on purpose. Cannabis was practical. The fibers made rope. The seeds were edible and surprisingly nutritious. You could weave the stems into rough cloth. It was, in the most literal sense, useful. Ancient people were deeply interested in useful things because surviving winter required a great deal of improvisation. The first deliberate use of cannabis as something more than fiber appears to have begun in ancient China. Around 2700 BCE, which is so long ago that writing hadn't fully caught on yet in most of the world, the legendary Emperor Shennong was reportedly compiling a kind of pharmacological guide. He tasted hundreds of plants to understand their effects. This was, to put it gently, a dangerous research methodology. According to tradition, Shennong found cannabis useful for pain, for restlessness, for what ancient physicians might have called nervous disturbance, and what modern people might call anxiety, or a very long week. His court didn't smoke it. They brewed it, mixed it into teas and tonics, ground it into powders with other herbs. They treated it seriously, the way they treated everything, with meticulous notes and an air of grave importance. Still, if you read between the lines of those ancient texts, you get the sense that people were enjoying this medicine, slightly more than they let on in their documentation. The Scythians, though, the nomadic warriors of Central Asia, somewhere around 1000 BCE, had no interest in pretending. Greek historian Herodotus wrote about them directly. He described Scythians crawling into sealed felt tents, throwing hemp seeds onto hot stones, and sitting together in the thick aromatic clouds. He wrote with what sounds like genuine admiration that they howled with pleasure. Archaeologists later found golden vessels buried in Scythian graves, still carrying traces of cannabis residue. These were not subtle people. They were horse riders who lived outdoors and found that hemp smoke eased grief after battle, opened something in the chest that all that cold wind kept closed. They weren't medicating, they were communing. Over in India, the plant took on something even more expansive. Cannabis appears in the Atharva Veda, one of Hinduism's oldest sacred texts, listed among the 5 sacred plants given by the gods. Shiva, the great destroyer and transformer, was said to have discovered it beneath a celestial tree and become its eternal devotee. He is still sometimes called the Lord of Bhang. Bhang, a drink made from ground cannabis leaves, milk, and spices, was not considered scandalous. It was devotional. Worshippers drank it at festivals. Monks consumed it during meditation. Midwives used cannabis preparations to ease labor. Priests incorporated it into temple rituals. There was something refreshingly honest about this approach. Nobody claimed it was purely medicinal. It was joy. It was transcendence. It was a way of feeling slightly closer to the vastness of everything, even if only for an afternoon. As cannabis traveled west along the Silk Road, that ancient network of trade routes, connecting China to the Mediterranean, it picked up new names, new associations, new rumors. By the time it reached Persia, it had become a tool of the mystics, burned during philosophical contemplation. Arab physicians praised it for melancholy. Sufi poets whispered about it obliquely in verse that was about union with the divine, and probably also about hashish. In Egypt, the Ebers Papyrus, a 3,500-year-old medical text, recommended cannabis for inflammation, glaucoma, and, this is a real entry, bad temper. That alone might have prevented several ancient wars. Rome used hemp for rope and sails. The entire Roman navy, the one that controlled the Mediterranean for centuries, depended on hemp cordage to hold the rigging together. Cannabis, in that sense, built the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire never fully acknowledged this, which feels very on brand for Rome. And through all of it, the ritual smoke, the sacred drink, the medical tonics, the ropes and sails, the plant just kept growing, in whatever soil it found, patient and persistent and somewhat indifferent to human opinion. Part 2. The circus that was actually an empire. Let's drift now gently toward Rome, toward a place that no longer exists except as a long green field between two ancient hills. The Circus Maximus. If you visited Rome today, you'd find a quiet, grassy depression in the earth. Dogs being walked, joggers, the occasional tourist standing at the edge trying to imagine what it looked like. What it looked like was this, nearly 600 meters long. 3 tiers of stone seating packed with 250,000 people. Sunlight bouncing off polished marble. The smell of animals and sweat and roasting food and crushed flowers and hot sand. And at the center of it, 12 chariots. Race days at the Circus Maximus were not sporting events in the way we use that phrase today. They were more like controlled collective madness. The crowd didn't just watch, they participated. They screamed, they wept, they threw things, they prayed, they collapsed. Some of them, when their team lost badly enough, needed to be physically helped out. The charioteers themselves were extraordinary. Most were not free men. They were slaves, purchased young by the racing factions and trained from childhood to handle 4 horses simultaneously while traveling at speeds that seemed impossible on a track that offered essentially no safety features whatsoever. The turning posts, the metae, were where the most crashes happened. A charioteer who hugged the post too tightly clipped it and flipped. A charioteer who went wide lost ground and position. The whole race was a sustained negotiation with disaster. When a crash happened, the crowd's reaction was not horror, it was awe. Romans had a complicated relationship with death. They respected it as a kind of performance. A charioteer who died well, dramatically, valiantly, still reaching for the reins, was remembered in song. The wreckage was cleared between races by crews who moved quickly and efficiently, and then the next race began as though nothing had interrupted anything. The 4 racing factions, the Reds, the Whites, the Greens, and the Blues, were not teams in the modern sense. They were closer to religions. Children were born into faction loyalty. Marriages dissolved over faction allegiances. When a beloved charioteer died young, and Scorpus, the great green driver, died in a crash at 26 after winning 2,000 races, the city genuinely mourned. His tombstone reads, "I carried off the victory palm 1,000 times, but I was cheated of my youth." Emperors used the circus as a kind of social pressure valve. A happy crowd at the races was a crowd not storming the Senate. Free grain and free spectacle, bread and circuses, kept the machinery of the empire running more reliably than any law. When an emperor was unpopular, the boos that echoed through the Circus Maximus were a serious political warning. More than one reign was measured by how the races went. The circus outlasted most of the men who built it. It held its last recorded race in 549 CE, by which point the Western Roman Empire had already collapsed. The marble was being carted away for other buildings, and the world was very different from the one that first cheered chariot wheels on hot sand. Now it's a field. Dogs chase each other through it in the early morning. The ghosts, if they're there, must find this peaceful. Part 3. The woman they couldn't stop whispering about. And finally, let's drift to a palazzo in Renaissance Italy. The candles are burning low. Someone somewhere is playing a lute. The air smells of perfume and political tension, which in 15th century Rome were more or less the same thing. Lucrezia Borgia was born in 1480 into one of the most complicated families in European history. Her father, Rodrigo Borgia, was a cardinal who would become Pope Alexander VI. Her brother Cesare was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. And Lucrezia herself, from the very beginning, was a pawn dressed in silk. By the time she was 12, betrothals were being made in her name. By 14, she was married to a man she hadn't chosen, sealing an alliance her father needed. By 16, she had been publicly accused of crimes she almost certainly didn't commit, had her marriage annulled by papal decree, and had become the subject of gossip across every court in Europe. None of this was unusual for the time exactly, but Lucrezia did something unusual with it. She survived it. And then she survived everything else. Her second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, she actually liked. He was kind and close to her age, which in that world counted as practically a miracle. They had a son together. For a brief moment, things were quiet and almost good. Then Cesare decided Alfonso was inconvenient. Lucrezia was 19 when she became a widow under circumstances everyone knew, and no one could prove. The whispers that followed her were relentless. Poisoner, seductress, the Vatican's dark flower. She was accused of so many things by so many people that her name became a kind of shorthand for female danger. Victor Hugo wrote a play about her. Donizetti wrote an opera. Painters depicted her holding goblets near skulls. What the surviving letters reveal is something quieter. A woman who worried about convent finances, who wrote tenderly about her children, who prayed regularly, who signed her correspondence, your most devoted Lucrezia. In 1502, she arrived in Ferrara as its new duchess and proceeded to build something no one expected. A court of genuine culture. Poets, musicians, philosophers, real ones, not decorative ones, gathered around her. The man who wrote Orlando Furioso, one of the great literary works of the Italian Renaissance, flourished under her patronage. The courtiers who had expected a Borgia brought poison and left confused to find a woman who brought literature. Her husband, Alfonso d'Este, initially wary, came to rely on her entirely. She handled diplomacy while he handled cannons, and somehow between them they kept Ferrara together through some of the most turbulent decades in Italian history. She died in 1519 at 39 after a difficult final pregnancy. By then, the scandalous daughter of the Borgia Pope had become simply the Duchess, admired, mourned, and finally, quietly, at rest. Her tomb shows her holding a book, not a weapon, not a goblet, a book. History has spent 5 centuries trying to decide what she really was. But maybe the question itself misses something. She was a woman born into impossible circumstances who made of them what she could. She endured what couldn't be changed and shaped what could. She built beauty where there had been only calculation. In a world that preferred its women either innocent or villainous, Lucrezia Borgia was neither. She was, stubbornly and quietly, herself, and that's where we'll leave things tonight. A plant that outlasted every civilization that tried to categorize it. A stadium that shook with 250,000 voices and is now just a field. A woman whose name became legend, and who probably just wanted a little peace. The lights are very low now. Let the images drift. The smoke rising from an ancient fire. The sound of hooves on packed sand. A candle burning in a Ferrarese palazzo late at night with someone reading. You can close your eyes now. History will still be here tomorrow. Sleep well.